There's a surprising level of optimism coming out of Las Vegas right now, but it's not supported by facts or performance. In this video, we're taking a hard look at how underwhelming the Raiders' offseason really was, and why fans of other AFC West teams, especially the Broncos, shouldn't be too worried about them becoming playoff contenders anytime soon. Let's start with the basics. The Raiders came into the offseason with a massive $92.5 million in cap space, one of the highest amounts in the league. But despite that, they made very few meaningful moves. Ask most NFL fans to name their top free agent signing, and outside of Geno Smith, who we'll cover shortly, it's tough to come up with anyone notable. To understand just how frustrated Raiders fans are, look no further than fan forums and message boards. Right after free agency, even die-hard fans were calling the offseason negligent and infuriating. One comment summed it up perfectly. This wasn't just underwhelming, it was a disaster. Keep in mind, this is a team that finished 4-13 last season and had the 7th worst defense in the entire league. Improving that unit should have been a top priority, and yet it wasn't. One of the biggest losses, linebacker Robert Spillane. Known for his physical presence and leadership, Spillane wore the captain's patch in Las Vegas and was one of the league's top run defenders. His 87.3 PFF run defense grade ranked 6th among 84 qualifying linebackers last season. And despite having the money to keep him, the Raiders let him walk, reportedly turning down a chance to match an offer that reunited him with head coach Mike Vrabel. Spillane wasn't just a key part of the defense, he was a tone setter. Letting him go without a clear replacement is a huge step back, especially for a team that already struggled mightily to stop the run. And it didn't stop there. They lost another linebacker who, at one point in the season, Week 6, was ranked the 3rd best in the entire NFL by PFF. Losing both players in the same offseason while sitting on a mountain of cap space raises serious questions about the direction of the Raiders front office. It only gets worse from here for the Raiders defense. One of the linebackers they lost wasn't just effective against the run, he was also one of the better coverage linebackers in the league. In Week 6 alone, he was graded as the 2nd best coverage linebacker in the NFL. That's 2 defensive starters gone from a unit that already ranked 7th worst in the league. But the departures didn't stop there. Las Vegas also let go of starting safety Trevin Moehrig. Moehrig's Pro Football Focus grade was almost identical to Robert Spillane's, an impressive 87.5 in run defense. At first glance, it almost seemed like a copy-paste error, but no. Moehrig was legitimately one of the top-performing safeties in that category. He also held up well in coverage, ranking 64th overall when lined up in the slot, which is not an easy task for a safety. Durability, not a concern either. Out of 66 possible games in his career, Moehrig suited up for 64. According to PFF analysts, at just 25 years old, he was positioned to be one of the top run-stopping safeties in the NFL this year. And yet, while experts urged the Raiders to hang on to their defensive cornerstone, he left and is now a Carolina Panther, and it still doesn't stop. Cornerback Nate Hobbs, arguably the team's best cover man, signed with the Green Bay Packers. In his rookie season, Hobbs actually posted a higher PFF grade than Patrick Surtain II, a point Raiders fans didn't let rival fans forget. Last season, quarterbacks completed just 42% of their passes when targeting Hobbs, which would have ranked 6th best among corners with at least 7 starts. He's a legit player, and Green Bay fans have every reason to be thrilled about picking him up. To make matters worse, the Raiders also released cornerback Jacorian Bennett, a young player with flashes of serious potential. Despite his inconsistency, he showed signs of being a future asset when he was locked in. That's 5 defensive contributors gone. So while there's been a lot of hype around incoming rookies like Brock Bowers or the expectations for Ashton Jeanty, it's important to remember defense wins games in this league, especially when you're facing elite AFC West quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and potentially Bo Nix. This defense was already struggling, and now it's lost 5 key pieces. Which brings us to the obvious question: who did the Raiders bring in to fill the gaps? Despite having $92 million in cap space, the splash signings were minimal. One name tied to Las Vegas was linebacker Dre Greenlaw, but reports say he chose the Denver Broncos over both the Raiders and his former team, the 49ers. Instead, the Raiders turned to their offense, With concerns around protecting Geno Smith, they went out and signed guard Alex Kappa from the Cincinnati Bengals. He was handed a hefty contract and will be expected to help solidify an offensive line that's had its share of issues. Let's break down some of the Raiders' biggest offseason moves, because on paper, they don't add up to much improvement. First up is offensive guard Alex Kappa, brought in from Cincinnati. Despite the hype around his signing, Kappa was ranked just 64th among all guards in the NFL last season. That's hardly elite. He allowed pressures on 15% of his pass blocking snaps and was beaten on 35% of his run blocking attempts. For a team hoping to protect its quarterback and establish a run game, that's not exactly the foundation you want to build on. To replace the defensive losses of Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo, the Raiders signed Devin White, formerly with the Buccaneers and most recently the Eagles. At a glance, that might seem like a solid move, but dig deeper and the concerns start stacking up. Reports from the Eagles beat writers described White as a liability. He missed too many tackles, gave up big plays, and was even benched for the first time in his career. According to insiders, his attitude reportedly rubbed both coaches and teammates the wrong way. His PFF grade dropped to a concerning 36.2 in his final season in Tampa Bay. For comparison, Spillane had an 87.3 run defense grade. That's a massive downgrade. And while White may have looked decent in Philadelphia, he was part of a dominant front seven that allowed him to play a limited role. That kind of system won't exist in Vegas, where he'll be asked to do much more without nearly the same support. Then there's the defensive line. Outside of Max Crosby, it's one of the weakest units in football. Reports around Christian Wilkins, their presumed defensive anchor, aren't promising either. His recovery timeline has been pushed back, with updates suggesting he won't be back by August. If Wilkins is out longer than expected, opposing offenses will continue to load up on Crosby with chips, doubles, and triple teams. That essentially neutralizes Vegas's only consistent threat on defense. Now, let's talk about Ashton Jeanty, a name that has Raiders fans buzzing. There's no denying his explosiveness at Boise State, but let's pump the brakes on the hype. College success in the Mountain West doesn't automatically translate to the NFL. Jeanty looked great on blue turf, but the defenders he torched are now working regular jobs, not chasing down elite athletes on Sundays. Even more questionable is the financial investment the Raiders made in him. Because of his high draft slot, Jeanty is now the second highest paid running back in the NFL, before he's even played a snap. He just signed a $32 million deal, while the league average salary for a running back sits at just $1.8 million. That's a risky way to build a roster in a league where smart teams avoid overspending at that position. Let's talk about how the Raiders doubled down, again, on decisions that make absolutely no sense if you're trying to build a winning football team. We've already broken down how much they overinvested in Ashton Jeanty, but it gets worse. There's a reason teams like the 49ers lost momentum after handing a massive contract to a running back. It's the same reason the Titans finally let Derrick Henry walk. You don't build around running backs anymore. Drafting one early, especially before fixing glaring holes on defense, is just bad team building. They had options. They could have traded back, taken a top-tier defensive player like Jalen Barron, and then picked up a solid second-round running back. Instead, they put all their eggs in the Jeanty basket. And then, in the second round, they drafted a wide receiver. Yes, they needed one after letting Davante Adams walk for basically nothing, but doubling down on offense when your defense was bottom 7 last year, that's just not smart football. Sure, maybe they're hoping Pete Carroll can get more out of this roster than Antonio Pierce did, but there's no real indication that's going to happen. The Raiders are hanging their hopes on two players, Ashton Jeanty and Brock Bowers, and yes, both could be special, but relying on two rookies is like going to Shanahan's Steakhouse and bragging about getting the best tater tots and mozzarella sticks. Number you go to Shanahan's for the steak, and in the NFL, the steak is the quarterback, and let's be real, Geno Smith is not that guy. Seattle moved on from him for a third-round pick. When you trade a starting quarterback for that little, it tells you everything you need to know. And look, teams don't do that unless they're sure he's not part of their future. Even the Colts only moved on from Peyton Manning when they were told he'd never be physically right again. On top of all this, the Raiders are facing one of the worst schedule disadvantages in NFL history. They have the fewest net rest days of any team in the league, a negative 19 differential. That's not just bad, that's historically bad. Their bye week? Wasted. They play teams like the Jaguars, who come off a bye themselves. They've got multiple stretches of short rest, and early in the season they're flying all over the country. Vegas to New England, back to LA, then out to play Washington, then the Bears, then the Colts. That's a brutal travel schedule with no rhythm to help them get into a groove. And unlike the Broncos last year, who started 0-2 but had a strong team culture under Sean Payton, the Raiders don't have that foundation. They've assembled a group of free agents and mercenaries. There's no chemistry, no identity, and when things get hard, there's no reason to believe this group will fight back. So sure, maybe Ashton Jeanty turns out to be great, but he's still just a really good mozzarella stick. And what we need in this division, what wins games, is steak. And Broncos fans, we've got that steak. His name is Bo Nix, and that's something we can all believe in.